yo me, ay, 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 ay. Ay, 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 ay.
Hello, folks. My name is Darlene Trigg. I'm Inupiaq. I was born and raised in Nome. I work for First Alaskans Institute as their social justice manager.
Hi, I'm Sylvia Lang. I'm from Cordova. I'm Aleut on my one grandmother's side, and on the other my other grandmother was Tlingit from Yakutat, and I'm a trustee at First Alaskans.
Uvanga Keranak Isiak Patulak, a Lordak Miungarunga, Tagar Koyagalu, Seravan Koyagalu, Akara Eva James, Asi Apara Belton Seravan, and Greg Tagar Jr. Ang Yukaka Agnes Lu John Lu. Anirong Anchorage me, Asi Niruktunga, Wasilami, Kovesuktunga Man, Mi Uvlupak. My name is Cordelia. My Inupiaq is Keranak, and I'm happy to be able to help out with elders and youth today.
My name is Devlin Anderstrom, Shako Ish. I'm Tlingit from Yakutat. I'm Kinech Kwan from the Moon House. My grandparents were also Otna, Tanacross, and Inupiaq. I like clams, cockles, and long walks on the beach.
Goodness cheese. Tlingit Chenach Dafkit at Chiuchat Duasak, Yes Nachatati, Gana Harika Gitlan Gun Harayachat. Goodness cheese for hearing my words. My Tlingit name is Dafkit Ach. I am Tlingit, Haida, and Simshian. I am Gitlan Gun Hara and Gana Hadi. I'm a raven starfish, and I am honored to be here. I am representing the University of Alaska Southeast Juneau campus. I run the Native Memorial Student Center, and I am honored to be at this table.
Good morning. Huinga no kagalugo, amitlamakan slu yupiugo, mamtakitlakamio, anaka yupiugok, guinakamiok, ataka kasawok, Port Orchard, Washington nakamingok, kekakamiok, Tlingit diugok, no ugo, haidaugo, Jasnath Higgins augo. My Yupik names are Nukaralok and Amitlamaganan. My English name is Valerie Davidson. I'm from Bethel. My mother's family is from Guiginok on the coast near Bethel. My dad's family is Gasak, or Caucasian or white, and they come from Port Orchard, Washington. And a few years ago, I was adopted by the Jackson family in Cake, and so now I'm also from Cake. And I was given the Haida name Jashnach Higgins, which I'm told means noisy lady. But I think it's, and I was named after my late Auntie Cheryl, and I'm sure it's only because I have a loud laugh. And I'm also on the board of First Alaskans, along with Sylvia.
Well, I'm so happy to be sitting here at a table with this assemblage of wonderful people to be able to talk about some of the conversations and issues that are happening. We're hearing a lot these days about talks about racism and racial tensions and issues, both on the national stage, but you're also hearing it a little bit more here at home in Alaska across the state. And we wanted to have a conversation about these issues because it can be really difficult to talk about, but also a lot of these issues are being talked about with a language of their own, with a lot of different terms and buzzwords. And so we want to be able to unpack some of that conversation here today at Elders and Youth because it is so important. So one of the first questions that I want to talk about is what is the difference between these terms that we hear, equity and equality? You know, we grow up hearing about the importance of, you know, equality and how important that is to our nation, but, you know, here at First Alaskans and other conversations, we really talk about the importance of equity. So what is the difference between those two really similar sounding terms?
So I think it's really important to understand that equity at its core is an unmet need, and if you think of equity in that sense, you can't have equality without equity. So I have a really great friend who teaches Haida back in Ketchikan, Ben Young, and we were working with some students over the summer, and I loved the example that he gave to our high school students. He said, equity is if I come into the classroom and I give all the students a pair of glasses because I'm treating them equally, are all the students really going to need those glasses? No, not all students need glasses. Equity says, I'm going to look at the classroom, I'm going to see what tools the students need access to, what resources. So I might bring glasses, a calculator, maybe some pencils and paper. So equity gives you an opportunity to provide unmet needs. So anyway, anybody else?
Yeah, so when I think about equality and equity, that was just a really great example. You know, it's really kind of a hard thing to kind of put to words. The terms themselves are kind of challenging things for us to kind of just talk about. So, you know, I love that you kind of laid out what equality is. Everybody gets the same exact thing. And when you think about equity, you're really thinking about what do people need. And equality was a really important component of how our state's constitution was put together. And it was fought for in a really strong way so that we all could have access to the things that we need. The challenge of equality compared to equity is, as Native people, we have to give up a part of who we are to be equal to somebody else's standard. And equity allows us to be who we are as Native people and valued at the same level. That's how I see the difference between equality and equity, really allowing Native people and people of color to really bring the strengths of everything they have into a conversation, into their lives, into their employment situations, when they go to school, and they're really able to just bring that their full self into whatever it is they do, and that it's valued.
I would say that Alaska Native families really want what every other Alaska family wants. We want our children to be healthy, we want them to be happy, we want them to live in safe communities, and we want them to be educated. So in that sense, we want equality. But what equity means is that in order to achieve that outcome, we may have to do things differently in order to achieve those things for our families and our communities. Because we know that what works in Anchorage or Fairbanks or Juneau, or even like the big city of Bethel with 6,000 people, isn't necessarily what's going to work in Guihinloq or a smaller community. And we have to be able, equity demands that in order for us to achieve that same outcome that we agree that everyone deserves, we have to do things differently because of our unique status and because it's the right thing to do.
So let's talk a little bit about racism. Let's just get right into it. So what is racism and what is prejudice, the difference between those two terms? Because you hear that a lot. And we want to be able to pack that with love and sharing that with our people today. We don't waste any time with elders and you. So a little bit about what the difference is between racism and prejudice.
I need to drink a gallon of water before we answer this question.
Yeah, that one's a challenging one to think about. So when you think about racism, it's really about a power dynamic that benefits one race. And in general terms, when you think about racism as it plays out in the United States, national level, right? We see it played out white and black, right? That's how we see racism played out. So it's a power dynamic that occurs when one group, racial group, benefits from oppressing another racial group. And it's not always real clear. It's a real invisible kind of thing that happens around us all the time. It's not something that we see on a regular basis with clear eyes. You know, you have to be kind of aware of it to kind of see its impacts. When you think about it in that way, it helps to see that, or helps to show that racism exists. And we see it not just in, we see it all over the place is really what I'm trying to say. And we see that when you look at positions of power, you can see racism playing out there. We know that the systems are designed to benefit one group of people because we see that the leadership in our government, in our companies, and so on and so forth isn't necessarily reflective of the beautiful diversity that our country has. And in Alaska, you see it played out in that way as well. When you look at the legislature or when you look at local community governments, school boards, those folks don't necessarily reflect the beautiful diversity that our state has as well. So when you think about racism and the difference between racism and prejudice, I think the difference there is certainly anyone can be prejudiced. It's the power dynamic that transitions it from prejudice to racism, right? So I can feel somehow or some way about something and I'm prejudiced against it, but I don't necessarily gain anything from it, which turns it into the ism, right? The intersection. I guess we should talk about too, like a little bit about that intersection between racism and sexism and ageism and all those other isms that kind of come into play.
I think, like you said, racism can be kind of invisible. It's really hard to see. And I think there are a lot of things that can be perceived as racist, and a lot of people don't realize it. A lot of people don't realize that it is actually something that's racist. I think that a lot of the ways that our society is set up right now, in a way they kind of just contribute to that racism. And one of the things, yesterday we were talking about institutional racism, and so that's on the institutional level, and one of the big ones is school. What we're seeing is that the Western culture is what's being taught as the core curriculum, and our culture is an elective. And to me, that in and of itself is contributing to the racism, because it's showing that we are not equal, we are not as important as this other culture. So could we talk a little bit about those other different kinds of racism that we see or that we don't see?
You bring up an important point. I've always thought of racism and sexism and all these other isms that you mentioned. It really is about power. Who has it, who doesn't, and who doesn't want to give it up. And when you talk about our educational system and this one curriculum fits all, that's shows that. Somebody not wanting, because knowledge is power, and the more knowledge you have of your history, of your place in the world, the more power you have. And so it is something enculturated, and it has to be brought to the table and examined. Who benefits, who doesn't, and that's when the equity comes in.
I really appreciate this conversation about how a lot of these are undertones, how they're beneath the surface, how a lot of these things are, invisible, or where you can sense them, but maybe you can't necessarily see them because you have maybe many people who think, well, what are the racial issues when you don't see signs that say no natives allowed anymore? So can you have something called reverse racism? Is that a thing? Because you hear that around sometimes as well.
I just don't accept it. I'm sorry. I probably use harsher language when somebody brings that up, frankly. Again, it's about information, and when somebody does bring up reverse racism, I think they just need to be taught, because frankly, racism is taught. So they need to be taught about what are we really talking about, who is harmed here and who is not. And reverse racism brings in the privilege of the power, of who has the power in the situation, and not wanting to give it up. And so it's a misnomer, in my opinion, but that's me.
So when I think about that term, reverse racism, I think it goes kind of back to that difference between racism and privilege. So when you think about an experience, I've had some examples given to me around a non-Native person going into a Native community and experiencing things that made them feel as though they were experiencing racism. They may have actually been experiencing prejudice. There's no doubt in my mind that there's a lot of prejudice out there. But it wasn't necessarily racism, right? Like even when you think about for instance, this is not a real example, but for instance, if you have a non-Native teacher come into a predominantly Native community and they experience prejudice because many different reasons, whatever the reason may be, it still isn't necessarily considered racism because they're still operating in a Western education system. There's still a power dynamic there, right? There is still a power dynamic that, and in that community, it's not necessarily reflective of the community's ways of knowing or being. They're operating inside a Western system. So they can be experiencing prejudice, but I wouldn't necessarily, like you said, Sylvia, I mean, reverse racism, misnomer, it's not something that truly exists. But that doesn't mean that people don't experience prejudice.
Reverse racism, so I work for the university and I hear comments from time to time. This is a really touchy subject for me, but I hear comments from non-Native folks saying all the Native students get all the scholarships. That is a myth. Everybody needs to know that's a myth. First of all, Native people, we make up less than 2% of the population for the United States, less than 2%. On top of that, non-Native people, and when I say non-Native, I'm actually talking about people who identify as white, 60% are more likely to get scholarships, including the private scholarships, leaving the remaining to be divvied up amongst all of us folks of color. So, and then if you look at the different races in the United States, it's the white culture that's still dominating as far as having access to education. So I just want everybody to take that home with you. That is a myth. Native people make up less than 2% of the United States. So there's no way we could be exhausting any scholarship, any kind of financial aid. Okay.
Thank you.
But when I was going to college, I really wish that was true, because I graduated, when I was done with my education, I had $76,000 in student loan debt. And so, but that was both undergrad and graduate school. And so, so I bristled every time somebody would say that, and I would say, that's not actually true. But we also hear it in other realms. So before I worked for the state, I spent 15 years in tribal health, and I would hear from people all the time, oh, oh, you're so lucky, you Native people, you're so lucky, you people, always that term, you people. When somebody says you people, hint, that's generally not a good thing. Just helpful tip for you there. You people get free health care. And the truth is, it's actually prepaid health care. It is health care that was negotiated, fought for by our forefathers and our foremothers because of, in exchange for cessions of land, in exchange for peace in times of war. And quite frankly, we have not received our full benefit under those arrangements. So if you think about it in other realms, so for example, agreements that are negotiated between Department of Defense contractors and the federal government for their services, all of their contract healthcare, all of their contract support costs were all covered. They were all paid. They were all prepaid. Ours in tribal health and also in social services on the BIA side were not paid and accrued millions of dollars and millions of dollars. And so when those settlements finally came, rather than people saying, wow, this is great that you are finally, that the federal government is finally honoring your contractual agreements, that isn't what happened. Everybody said, why are you guys getting such a big check? Why is tribal health getting this money and these resources? The reason it happened all at once is because those dollars had been withheld for generations. And, gee, I sure got on my high horse there. Those oranges are kicking in. But I do want to say one thing before I leave this table, because I don't know how much time we have, and I'm worried I'm going to forget it. But I have nieces. And so anyway, we'll talk about that later.
I want to follow up. I do appreciate you talking about healthcare. The other part of education, as she mentioned, the loans. So when it comes to loan forgiveness for you students who are going to college, there are teaching loans and there's health loans, and the way that you are able to pay them back is by going into your community and teaching within one of our rural communities. You're able to provide health care in our rural communities. That's really fantastic if you're from Alaska. The problem with this system, and this is way beyond us, is that we have loan forgiveness that gets offered to people who are not from Alaska. And because of that, we have non-Alaskans coming into Alaska doing their loan forgiveness with their teaching and with health care. These are folks who haven't been trained to work with our people. They haven't been trained to understand our culture, our language. So there's not really a commitment that goes along with this loan forgiveness. So that's a part of that systemic racism that we're talking about. It's set up to perpetuate these visitors who come into our communities with good intentions, but find out that it's not a good fit because they aren't familiar with our history, they don't know our culture, they don't know our language, and they don't know how to commit to us. And that is something that needs to be addressed both in teaching and in healthcare. We need to figure out how to interrupt that oppression. So anyway, just handling that. Thank you.
So we've mentioned it a couple times here, and it's been a really big part of the national conversation when it comes to racism for a while now. It's a thing called privilege. And I was wondering if we could talk a little bit about that. Maybe first, what is privilege and how is it in effect here in Alaska?
My best off for this.
I think it is really important to bring up, especially as we look at racism moving beneath the surface in terms of back in the day what you overtly see, but then nowadays it's about what maybe you don't necessarily see.
Yeah, I'm going to go back to education and just talk a little bit about that. So I'm going to tell you just a little story. I didn't understand our history. I was not taught our history in school. I did not have a good sense of why our people behaved and did things to harm and hurt themselves. I didn't know. I didn't know until I was in my 30s. And that was a hard thing for me to be at that age and come into my awareness around why things have happened to our people and why our people respond and behave in the ways that they do. And as I was coming into my own awareness, I was sharing that with my children. So I have a daughter, and she was coming into her awareness as I was coming into mine. And she was in high school. And in high school, she was taking history, and oftentimes in her classes, she would ask, "So what about the natives?" As they were learning their lessons about, what the textbook shares. And oftentimes, there was an attempt maybe to respond to the question, maybe not. But one of her classmates, I think, finally got tired of her posing the question and said, "This is white US history." And it's the truth. That's privilege at its core. It is the fact that history is taught from the perspective of white people, and it is thought of as history, and everyone else's history is discounted and is not included in the textbooks. So when I think about privilege and I think about white privilege, right? White privilege is their history is taught. It is core curriculum. And anything in Native
It's optional.
It's optional. Yeah, it's extracurricular. That to me exhibits what privilege really is.
Yeah, thank you for that. So from an academic perspective, it's so funny. So no DAPL is happening, right? Standing with Standing Rock. And I know, right? Woo! And we see two things being reported out. We are either being labeled as, and I'm saying we as in the collective, the Native folks from all over the United States, we're being labeled as tyrants and aggressive for protecting human rights. This is what everyone should have access to: clean drinking water, clear of any threat. And the fact that the media gets to portray our Native people in such a way is just deplorable. But on the other side, there's this beautiful underground, and actually I shouldn't even call it underground anymore, we're now becoming national, that there are so many people understanding that this is not an aggressive way to protect our water. This is in fact, and I love this, one of my colleagues said to me, don't call it a protest, call it protect. We're protecting, we're protectors. We're protecting what we have rights to. And so you talk about that privilege of who determines what we value, and then who is gonna highlight what we see. And academically, like you said, those textbooks that we're doling out to all of our students, the conversations that are happening with our faculty and our students, if it interjects any kind of Native history, it's a challenge to our faculty who aren't aware of our histories. Anyway, gosh, that hit a nerve. I'm gonna drink some water. It's your turn. Water is life. Woo! Thank you.
Well, I think if you don't recognize privilege, or you don't know what privilege is, then you most likely have it. The discussion of privilege didn't happen until people without it started mentioning that they were that they didn't have it, and they've been left behind. Sorry. Up closer, sorry. So again, if you don't know what privilege is and you don't recognize it, then you most likely have it.
So we also see it play out in small ways and really big ways. So in the school system, for example, my youngest two baniks are 15 and 13, Dayak and Dagalok. And Dayak really looks like her dad. Her dad is half Zia Pueblo and half black. I'm half Yupik and half white. And so Kylie's really long, beautiful, gorgeous black hair, big brown eyes, beautiful brown skin. Alana looks just like her, except that she has light skin. And they are treated very differently at school. And I used to be a teacher, and that is a very painful thing to see. And the privilege of knowing that when Alana is in advanced classes, the youngest one, Daulok, she's a light-skinned girl, when she is in advanced and honors classes, she is never questioned about her ability to be there. But for my older daughter, she has been questioned repeatedly in parent-teacher conferences about whether, did I understand that this was an honors level class, honors level math class, and so should my daughter really be in that class? And I said, well, what do you mean by that? And the teacher said, and this was in 7th grade, so it was 2 years ago, the teacher said, well, you know, students from your daughter's background may not necessarily be ready for a class like this. And I said, well, what do you mean by her background? And so I really put it out there, made her speak to it. And she said, well, you know, I just mean, and she was stuck. I mean, she was stuck. I called her out. And she said, well, I mean, you know, students who have come from parents who have limited math proficiency. And I said, have we met before? And she said, no, I don't believe so. And I said, have you met her father? And she said, no, I don't believe so. And then I said, then why would you make that assumption about us as a family and as parents? So let me tell you about about Kylie's parents. Kylie's dad is a custom welder and a fabricator. And that means he does trigonometry, geometry, algebra, calculus in his head all day long. He is a math whiz. I took calculus as a senior in high school. So if you're concerned about limited math proficiency in this family and her parents being able to provide the support that this child needs, that is not this family. And at the same time, I tried to be so respectful, but also call out the behavior, but was really treated as the aggressor in that situation. And I was, you know, people from other tables kind of looked to see what was happening. She backed away from the table a little bit as if I was being, you know, attacking her. And I was just calling out behavior. And the most calm, I tried to channel my mother's best inner Yupik with the eyebrows that speak volumes. And so I understand just from being with my mother how intimidating those eyebrows can be. But I think when those things happen, we have to call out that behavior. So sometimes it happens in those ways that are really, really egregious, and you have to say something. And then other times it happens really in ways that are much smaller. For example, when I landed here in Fairbanks at the car rental counter, there were four people in line. 3 of us were Native, 1 was not. And the person who was not Native was the last person in line, and I was waiting to be served. I was waiting my turn in line just like everybody else. But the non-Native lady, as soon as the person I was waiting for was done, skipped all of us and went to the front of the line to have her needs met, because clearly she needed to have, her issues were more important than the other 3 of us who were waiting in line. And I was like, you know, we're in line too. She goes, oh, I just need da-da-da-da-da. And she filled in, you know, whatever it was that she needed. And then, and it was clear she was not going to leave. That's privilege. Her believing that having her needs met is more important than the needs of everybody else who had been waiting in line before her. And when it was my turn again, to go to the front of the line to deal with the car rental lady, I said, you know, we are all waiting here in line. And you let this person jump the line, and she was at the back of the line, and she justified her decision to have her needs met before everybody else who was waiting. And I said, that's inappropriate. We all have you have no idea if her needs were greater than the rest of ours because you didn't give us that chance. And so sometimes it can happen in really big ways, and sometimes it can happen in really small ways.
I just want to make a follow-up comment. You mentioned all the different beautiful cultural relations in your family. And what I want to say, what I hope everybody takes away from this is that privilege is determining who is enough or who is not enough. That's privilege. Because you're not enough because you're a full blood, or you're not a full blood because you're half blood. That's privilege. What I would like to see, because we all have privilege in some form, I'd like to see us lift each other up and say, you're enough.
Very nice.
Yes.
Anyway,
Heck yeah.
Thank you.
So we're talking a lot about these messages, sometimes these small messages that you get, but they don't feel that small when you're on the receiving end. They're often called microaggressions.
I have one. I have one. Oh, sorry. That was
That's
a
all I need to
microaggression
say.
right there.
Drop mic.
All right, here we go. I was at a gathering, okay? I was at a gathering. I was sitting in the front row, and this lovely leader went up to the mic. She just started with our campus, and she said she was getting ready to announce the next session that we were all getting ready to break away to, or maybe it was an upcoming event. I can't remember because I got really flustered. So I'm Tlingit Haida and Tsimshian, and I'm fortunate that I get to come to these events and hear beautiful language. I believe the title of the session was Yuyurok, and I apologize if I said that wrong. But this person assumed, because of the color of my skin and because I'm from Alaska, that I spoke everybody's languages. Now, that's a dream of mine. One of these days, I've got goals. Got goals. But that microaggression is when she called me out. I was sitting right in the front row, and she said, I'm going to ask Colleen, I need you to read this for me. And I was shocked. And I thought, okay, well, I'm going to pull it together, and I'm going to go up there, and I'm going to try to help her. I grabbed it, and I read it. Oh, okay. Please forgive me if I don't say this right. And that's not Tlingit, it's not Haida, it's not Tsimshian. It's beautiful, but it's not me. Anyway, the microaggression was assuming that I spoke everyone's languages from Alaska. Man, I would love to be Superwoman, but I do not speak everybody's languages, and I would love to. But that assumption that I speak everyone's languages, that was really embarrassing. I wanted to just like slip away because, you know, to have that put on me like that in front of, there must have been about 150 people in the room, and the terrible part is that everyone in the room didn't, maybe 10%, maybe the brown faces that were in the room caught that, but the rest didn't catch it. They didn't catch it. And my fault was not to call her on it in front of everybody. I'm not into drama. I don't want to put her on blast like that. I did pull her aside, though, after, and the beautiful part is we had this wonderful conversation, and she is working on trying to figure out how to prepare herself for the next opportunity. So the next time she has something that she's going to read, she doesn't know how to pronounce it, there's two approaches I asked her to consider. One is to check with the leadership at the campus to see if somebody knows how to pronounce it, or we'll get her connected to it. Or it's easy enough to say, does anybody in the audience, you have your agenda, can you help me pronounce this word? And then people who know the language, can you speak it? So anyway, thank you. Microaggressions.
Microaggressions, yes. Yes. So I think one of the things that I think about when I think about microaggressions, I really, really appreciate you bringing up using our language, right? So I am not an Inupiaq speaker. I am Inupiaq, but I'm not a speaker. I'm fair-skinned. My parents saw that in me when I was very little, and they, with intention, spoke to me in English, even though they were fluent Inupiaq speakers. They, with intention, spoke to me in English so that I could be successful in school. Now, I have no hard feelings about that with my parents. They were doing what they thought was best for me. I'm grateful that they thought about me and what I needed to be successful in this world. So I am now a grandmother. I have a beautiful little granddaughter, and we have chosen to give her a name that is not an English name. Her name is Kangisak. And she has a middle name that is an English name. And I'm not even going to say it because I would rather it just not be something. It's a beautiful middle name. But folks have asked if they could call her by her middle name or abbreviate her name to KJ because it's easier to say. That's not okay. That's a microaggression. Try. Just try. You don't have to get it right. That's okay. It doesn't have to be perfect. We can give people grace when they are trying. You know, that's a beautiful thing. So to hear her name, Kangisak, just try. You know what I mean? Like that in itself. You know, we experience microaggressions all the time, and there's an impact to them on us as people when we experience them. So, you know, we internalize the things that we hear around us all the time. And I remember being in high school and having one of my teachers say, "Oh, you're so smart for a native," as though that was an okay thing to say, right? I'm just a person, I'm smart. I would have graciously taken the compliment at that point, but I had internalized so much microaggressions in my life that I was grateful. I actually thanked them for telling me I was smart for a native. I thanked them. Oh, thank you. Like that's internalizing all of the negative things that our society tells us about ourselves. I had internalized the oppression that I was experiencing around me on a day-to-day basis. That's another impact of microaggressions.
I really appreciate you bringing up how these things can be internalized as we look at our theme for this year, you know, ancestral imperative, adapt, unite, achieve. And when we say that our people are naturally like high achieving people, to some people that could be news to them. They might not know that about their own peoples based on the issues that we have in our communities. And people might think that that's just who we are. But really, it's internalizing all of those different messages. And when you're talking about names, it reminds me of a lot of some of the statewide reaction to the Barrow name change back to Utqarvik. Utqarvik. That change because a lot of people, the blowback statewide is almost like that's something that the town of Barrow is doing to you. We're not doing this to you. That's a harder thing to say, that our ancestral names are not as valid as the names that have been put on our places.
There's another thing that I've noticed too with personal names. So growing up, For those of you that know me, growing up, I was only known as Shako Ish. Nobody ever really called me by my English name, and I was just used to that. And something that I noticed when I would go down south or when I'd leave the village, and people would ask me what my name was, I would tell them what I knew my name was, Shako Ish, and then they would ask me, but what's your real name? And that was such a common question. They'd ask, okay, but what's your real name? Like that's your Indian name. What's your real name? And so, like Cordelia said, they're making our names and our languages seem less valid. And it made me feel really weird about it for a long time, because that's who I identified as for all the formative years of my life. Was this native person. My name is Shako Ish. That's the name that I was given. And here I had to go by this other name that I didn't know as well. And I've gotten more used to it because it happens all over the place. So yeah, there's that invalidation of our native names.
We've had so many amazing topics in this time, and so let's talk a little bit about the ANDORE project in closing, what First Alaskans is doing, but also how local communities can be empowered to have these types of discussions in their communities with their leadership and with their families.
So First Alaskans Institute has been engaged in a racial equity project since 2010. It's called Advancing Native Dialogues on Racial Equity. And these conversations are really important to both heal us from the things that we experience, the things that we've talked about this morning on the stage, that interpersonal relationship, but it also offers up the opportunity for us to change the way things operate in our state, in our systems, and in our institutions. So it also addresses those things. We can advance policy solutions that can change our state. In some communities, people have advanced policy solutions. So for example, those of you students who are from Nome Public Schools, you don't have to worry about having absences on your time for being here, because the school has created policies that allow for you to be here, and they know this is a good learning environment for you. So this counts as class time. Yeah, that's a great thing. And if you were out with your family and you were learning how to take care of a seal or a beluga or something along that lines, that counts as class time too. They've changed the way their policies work in the institution so we can make it better for our kids. We have a lot of opportunities to do those kinds of things in our state, and that's really what our Racial Equity Project is really trying to advance. It's both healing us as people and changing the way our systems and communities operate. We have focus areas in this phase of our project, so we know that we want to impact the education system. We know we want to change public perception around race and racial tensions in our state, so we have a public advocacy component, but we also have a legal component, really changing the way the systems of our state operate, trying to make it better for our people. And we've been doing work in that way in relationship and partnership with our commissioner, Val, whose guidance has really allowed us to think about how we can change the child welfare system into a child well-being system. And I'm going to let Val talk about that just a little bit.
So when the Walker and Malott administration came into office, we had some pretty honest conversations about what's happening in our child welfare system. And we knew that we had some pretty significant disparities. Alaska Native children make up about 20% or 22% of our state's population, but when we came into office, 62% of the children in out-of-home placements were Alaska Native children, 62%. And that is an unacceptable number. We have made some progress, and right now we're at about 55%, and we're trending in the right direction from 61 or 62 to 55, but we know that we're not there yet. And we reached out to First Alaskans along with a partnership with funds from the Casey Family Programs. And we brought people together, a small group of about 30 people, and we had really difficult conversations, really honest conversations about what's not working in our child welfare system. And we said, we want to know the truth. We want to know how bad it is. And things got very real very fast. And that's a good thing. And hard things were said and hard things were heard. And it was necessary. We had people in the room who were suing each other, people from the Department of Law, Alaska Legal Services, Native American Rights Fund. We had representation from tribes, tribal organizations, ICWA workers, OCS, were Office of Children's Services workers. And it was incredible, the conversations that we had. But it was also really hard and really painful because we all know collectively that really difficult things have happened to our children and our families. And we needed to acknowledge that hard truth and also develop a path for how are we going to improve things for our children and for our families. We had a series of 5 meetings, and after every meeting we said, we asked ourselves, who isn't here that should be? Who else should we invite into having this conversation? And so the meetings, as we went over time, grew in terms of participation. But where we ended up with, thanks to First Alaskans, is a strategic plan for how we're improving child welfare outcomes for Alaska Native children. And there are 6 elements. And the first is recognizing that we want to have respectful government-to-government relationships, and that we recognize that tribes are governments, and that we should be dealing with tribes in the same way that we deal with other states and the same way that we deal with the federal government. Tribes are governments, and we have to respect that government-to-government relationship. We also, the second one is we are interested in compacting for services. My background is in tribal health. I spent 15 years there, so I'm aware of the benefits of compacting for services. And we asked ourselves the question, is there a better way to do what we're doing right now? Do we have to be the one, do we as in the state, does the state of Alaska have to be the one providing this service? Or can tribes do a better job? Because they know the children, they know the families, and they can do it in a culturally appropriate way. So second is self-governance. The third is we want to embrace the spirit of ICWA, the Indian Child Welfare Act. There's the letter of the law, which is you must do these things at a minimum, or there's the spirit of the law, which recognizes that ICWA is good for Alaska Native children, and it's good for Alaska. And so not just doing what the letter of the law requires as a minimum requirement, but really embrace the spirit of ICWA because it's there for a reason. We don't want to see 20 years from now adults posting on Facebook, "Do you know me? I was raised in Chicago or Seattle or Anchorage, and I'm looking for my family." We see those posts all the time. 20 years from now, 30 years from now, we don't want to see that anymore. The fourth is, which is a big one, we recognize that Alaska Native culture is what keeps children safe. And it builds resiliency in children. And when traumatic things happen to our children, it's our culture that's going to help to bring kids back. It's our culture that's going to help restore us to who we really are as people. Because the truth is, we've been doing this for thousands of years. And we've been doing it extremely well. I don't mean we as a state, I'm talking about, I'm in my qasbaq right now, so I'm speaking as a Yupik. Alaska Native people do this really well. When we adhere to our traditional values, our kids are better off. The fifth one is community engagement. And I want to talk a little bit about that right now, because for so long we have let ourselves believe that, if it's a child welfare issue, we have an ICWA worker who does that. Oh, it's a child welfare issue, that's the Department of Health and Social Services, or that's OCS. Really, community engagement is about every single person in this room. Every single person needs to know what we need to do to make sure that children are safe. It's not my problem, it's all of our problem. It's everyone's problem to solve. And then the last one, the sixth one, is recognizing and identifying the barriers that we have, and this time I'm saying in the state system, the barriers to being able to implement those things and across division lines. But we also know that what's good for Alaska Native culture is good for Alaska Native children. And what's good for Alaska Native children is good for all children. And what's good for Alaska's children is good for Alaska. And I just wanted to say Qoyana Chaknak to First Alaskans for this incredible work. So Qoyana.
Let's go ahead and do a quick round of closing remarks.
So I actually think we need to get folks talking to each other because we know that you guys have the answers to healing. You've heard us talking a little bit about the challenges that we face, and we know that there's a lot of healing that needs to happen in our communities around the racial tensions that we experience on a day-to-day basis. So if you can, at your tables, please, we're going to talk about what is healing for our people. Let's get a handle on that too. So spend some time talking to each other. You have poster paper there, you have markers. Spend some time talking about what is healing for our people. And somebody at the table, if you can, please take those tasty bits, jot down those notes. We have about 10 minutes for us to continue on this conversation. Thank you guys so much. Thank you guys for spending the time, sharing your feisty energy and your committed spirits with us all. I really appreciate that.